My name is Paul Sheeler. I am third generation. My son is fourth generation Christmas tree producer. My wife and I and our son own Evergreen Acres Christmas Tree Farm in Auburn, Pennsylvania. Our farm was started in 1945 when my father got out of the service. We're mostly a wholesale operation. We're shipping several thousand trees into New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and most of our customers are in southeastern Pennsylvania. I worked for Penn State Cooperative Extension for 28 years, and my specialty area of education that I taught other growers was Christmas tree production. This is a top off a 6-foot tree. I just cut it off the other day. Isn't that beautiful? That's genetics for you. Bad genetics. Genetics plays a big part in this industry. Hopefully we'll learn some of that. When you're buying plants, sometimes these nurseries really can play with you a little bit with what they put into a pack of seedlings. This picture down here, you see the uniformity of the size of those plants. Look at the uniformity of the root systems. If you can get plants that look like that, short, stocky, big caliper, you know, not an excessive leader on it. Look at the knot up on top there of the buds. I mean, you're talking an absolutely beautiful plant to put in the field. That is the kind of plant you're looking for. Keep going. You see these plants in the seed bed here? They're short, they're stocky, they're not whippy or anything like that. Look at those, look at the whirl of buds they got on top of them, okay? These are really, really beautiful plants. And that's kind of what you want to be starting with. Talking about seed sources, here is a case. This is a situation I ran into as a county agent. I had a guy, a Christmas tree grower, and he says, Paul, I got needle cast in my Douglas fir. I kind of laughed. I said, so does everybody else. So he said, no, this is different. He says, I want you to come out and take a look at these. So I went out to his farm, and he had Lincoln Douglas fir, and there's another seed source that you may see occasionally called Deep Mountain. Has anybody ever seen Deep? You've seen it? You've seen it. Have you ever seen Deep Mountain advertised? Deep Mountain, I think, if I'm not mistaken, comes out of Montana, a little bit south of where Shuswap Lake or Shuswap variety come from, or cultivar comes from. Well, these Deep Mountains had Swiss needle cast. And so did the Lincolns have Swiss needle cast. But the Deep Mountains were a little bit worse than the Lincolns were. I said, the guy's name was Dick Fetter. I said, Dick, the only thing I can tell you, the trees are young. I think we can bring them back. Stay on the spray schedule. Make sure you keep hammering these trees. Give 3 or 4 applications on them. I said, I think we can turn these around. I think like in June he called me up. He said, Paul, I think you ought to come and take a look at these trees again. And I went out, and the Lincolns were recovering fine. The new growth was coming out. He was keeping the new growth clean. Almost every one of those Deep Mountain was dead. In one infestation, the Deep Mountain died from the infestation of Swiss needle cast. And the Lincolns were beginning to recover and grow out of the problem. So it goes to show you, now, we try to avoid these problems with pest problems like this needle cast, but there's a case, if it did catch you, there's a chance you're going to lose your whole tree. Okay, so there's one, if you want to put in your notes to avoid, is Deep Mountain. Is avoid that one. And it didn't impress me anyway. I grew 30 of them one time, and out of 30 of them, I think like 22 of them had white pine weevil. The white pine weevil went right through the regular Douglas and found those Deep Mountains. They just loved them. Okay, and this is another case I want to just show you. It's similar to the sample I showed you. This is it's a genetic and can be a seed source issue. This growth habit you see in the top here, very characteristic of the Apache. Remember I said how woody they get up on top of the Apache? That's very typical of Apache. This is what you people need to pay attention to. what the numbers mean, okay? 1/0 is a 1-year-old seedling, okay? It was planted, it grew for 1 growing season. A 2-0 is a 2-year-old seedling. 3-0 and 4-0, the same thing. Now we got to start making transplant. What is a transplant? It's when the nursery goes in there and they lift the seedlings and turn around and replant them. So now we have a 2-year-old seedling. It was a 2-year-old seedling. It was lifted and replanted, and it was in the transplant bed for 1 year. A 3-year-old plant. Why do we do that? Why do we make these transplants? 2-year seedling, 2-year transplant, 2-year seedling, 3-year transplant. Why are we doing that? What's that?
To speed up the turnaround?
Nope. In the long run, it's going to help you as a grower. But what it's doing is putting a root system, putting a massive roots under those trees. Because it's the roots that's going to push that tree. Okay? And in more recent times, we're starting to mess around with the plugs. Okay? What a plug is, it's a greenhouse-produced seedling in a plug. And then, do these show plug? Can you see the plug remains on these? A little bit on that. Yeah, this one, it kind of really shows it. Now this is a Canaan Fir plug plus 2. That's this plant right here. Okay, just add, a plug is 1 year in the greenhouse. 1 year in the greenhouse, so it's basically a 3-year-old plant. You see the remains of the plug? Can you see the shape? That was the plug that was produced in the greenhouse. It was taken out of the plug and planted in a transplant bed, and then it was grown another year to get a good root system underneath it. Now, we said earlier, you can buy cheaper plants. You can buy those 1, 2, and 3-year-old seedlings. But this is the kind of root system you're getting. Stuff like, well, not even on any of these. These are decent root systems. But very spindly root systems. And there's not enough push behind that plant to keep it to survive. And then, if you throw into the mix there maybe some marginal weed control, and you've lost that plant. Now, you may have bought 5,000 plants at a cheaper price that you would have only gotten 1,000 for if you would have gotten one of these plugs pluses or a larger transplant, and they would have been they cost you more. You got less plants, but you had a much better chance of survival on those plants. Okay, but that's kind of important here, is to know what you're buying, because the catalogs will say 1-year-old seedlings, 2-year-old seedlings, a plug plus 1, or a 2-2, or a 3-2. The only thing you got to be careful of, and especially something like Douglas fir, here's the real problem. You start getting into these bigger plants, you're going to be talking about a tree that's that big. Okay, a tall, lanky leader that's, if you're going to use a planting machine, are difficult to get through a planting machine. They get whippy. Trying to handle them and plant them, buds get broken off of them. I do not like, these on your like your Nordman and Turkish and things like that, you'll see this often here, and they're fine. But if you see this in a Douglas fir, you better watch out, because you're going to have a huge, monstrous plant. This, the biggest on a Douglas I would ever consider would be a 2-2. Biggest. Most likely a 2-1 or a plug 1 on a Douglas fir, because they just grow like weeds. Well, even that, they have a tendency of, yeah. A lot of hand planted, they still have a tendency to be very whippy in the wind and things like that. Any other? Somebody else had a question. +1 +1. Yep. What is it? It's a greenhouse plug. It was put in a transplant bed, and it was lifted and turned around and put back in the transplant bed. It's the shocking of that plant. The act of lifting it, it's a shock on the system. and it stunts the top growth. Because you get a plant that big, if you would have left that plug plus, well, even this, if this was a Douglas fir, that's a pretty big plant too. But it shocks them. It keeps them shorter, stockier, a heavier caliper, and a big, massive root system underneath them to push them. That's exactly what that is. It's lifting it, turning around, and replanting it. Yeah.
Typically, they don't recommend fertilizing when you know, the first year of transplant.
I don't believe in it.
So, is there a...
Other than your field prep fertilizers.
Right.
I believe in your field prep fertilizers, yeah.
Are there any cases where you get to the older stuff that you would recommend fertilizing? When you get a plant, maybe in the fall or something?
I believe in fertilizing any of these in the fall. That's fine. That's fine. I'm a little leery first thing in the spring. I have messed around a little bit with young Frasers, maybe in the ground, maybe a month, giving them a little bit of shot of something like a 10-10-10 or something like that. And I really can't say, if it's a good plant, it has enough stored carbohydrates in it that I really haven't saw the effect of the fertilizer. It grew well on its own. Okay, yeah?
Do you do any root dips or anything?
Root dips, no. I have messed around with some of those gels a little bit. I don't do them anymore. And I'm going to tell you something that I cannot substantiate. It's just my sick way of thinking. You take a root dip, one of these gels, and you dip it. And what's the purpose of the gel? Hold moisture. Now, this is just my way of thinking. I can't substantiate this. You take that plant and you dip it in gel. You take it out in the field and you plant it. Okay? Now the tree is put under drought stress. So now that gel, the theory, it's drawing moisture from the surrounding soil. Fine. Now, what happens when and if that soil moisture drops below a certain level? Now I'm going to throw a question. Does the gel pull from the plant? I don't know, and that's why I stopped messing around with it. It's just a thought that I had. Is there a possibility of that gel pulling from the plant?
Do you use any of the systemic insecticides?
Nope.
Any of that in a root dip?
Nope. I dip them in water into the planter tray and plant them. Got to keep the roots wet while they're in the planter tray while you're planting them and stuff like that, but I have not messed around with dips. Somebody also told me some of those root dips will peel the paint off of anything. Take the paint off your planter and all the planter boxes, just peels the paint off like paint thinner. Somebody told me that. I don't know if it's true or not.
Fingernail polish remover.
What's that? Yeah.
They'll kill
Is
the
it?
grass around where you dip them.
Will it?
Yeah.
You see, I've never messed around with it. All right, just a couple slides on these seedling things, unless there's more questions on it. This is the picture I showed you earlier on. You see how the uniform that batch of seedlings is, or I should say transplants? That's kind of what you're looking for. And too often, our nursery suppliers will put that in a packet, okay? And it's a shame because if you went to a supermarket and you were buying fruits or vegetables, most likely you wouldn't want that little potato in there or something like that. But yet we get stuck with them in the tree business. Okay, it's just the way it happens. But if your nursery is supplying a range like that, something needs to be said, or a new nursery supplier needs to be lined up. Because it's a shame to get a variety like that. This is kind of the uniformity you're looking for. Now, some people would say to me, well, if I get this, I'll take these small guys and I'll put them in a transplant bed. Fine, but that's not what you paid for. Because you paid the same much for that plant as you did this plant. All right? The other thing I want to point out here, a lot of nurseries will root prune. And that's fine. You got those long, straggly roots, they should be cut off because they cause other problems in the planting process. But these look like they have been root pruned. You see they're fairly level across. Now, look at this one. Now, he was cut way too much. way too much. It's okay to take some of those wild hairs off the end, but that's getting too much down to your main root mass. Now, yeah.
Subtopic off this, when planting, I use a mechanical tree planter, but the J rooting is something that, is that?
Ta-da, my next topic.
Okay, all right.
My next topic. Well, we're going to be talking a little bit more about planting, I think in the next slide set. But while you're on that subject, this is called J root. This was a Scotch pine that was planted by a high school kid. They didn't make the hole deep enough, jammed it in the ground, and backfilled it. That's the root. It would lay like that. And then the plant decided to try to send a root down. Now, you see how small the trunk was on that tree? The rest of the field was that big around. Do you see how that stunted that tree? That J root? That's why we don't want a J root. That's why we want a good hole, if you're planting by hand, a good hole, loose dirt, get those roots fanned out, and backfill it. Okay, to prevent that. It'll make a much happier plant. There's nothing wrong with planting bars if they're done right. But planting bars work good with seedlings. I have problems with them with transplants. You start getting some real big transplant with big roots, you can't open up a nice enough hole with a planting bar. Like I said, seedlings fine. But if you're planting by hand and you're planting plants like this, I would highly recommend you jump on the shovel, dig a hole, and plant it. Now, we've graduated beyond that stage, except when we're backfilling. Like I said, we plant with a machine this year. We'll go back next year and plant those that died, and then leave them the rest go. We don't plant any after that. Well, we do that by hand. We'll just go with a shovel, jump on a shovel, dig a hole. Someone gets down on their hands and knees, spreads those roots out, and backfills it, and go from there. Okay, but that is something we want to avoid is J rooting. You can get this with planters too if your planter's not set up right, and you can get a J root with a planter. Another reason why I like nice, loose, workable ground, plowed ground, is because when my planter goes through, that shoe is opening up the soil, getting it out of the way, the plant goes in, and the soil just flows right around the root. Oh man, you can't beat that. So that plant's in there the way it belongs.
So I till before, is that a good idea, bad idea?
I like tillage.
Okay.
I do like tillage. And especially we get back to our nutrients we added, the fertilizers and the limes, that tillage incorporates all that. Remember I told you how some of those things moved in waves through the soil? Now it's all incorporated. Now it's down where the roots need it when it's incorporated.
Okay. And a month or two before planting, or should I do it the year before? It doesn't matter.
I like, if you can do it the fall before. Okay, that is and then plant a cover crop. When I say a cover crop, I'm talking wheat or barley. Only those two. Stay away from rye because it gets too damn tall. But rye or barley. And then early in the spring, you'll just plant through that. You come along with your herbicides. It kills the wheat or barley in your band. You have wheat or barley coming up between your rows. It goes to seed. You mow it off. It goes to seed again. And then it dies. And then what comes in, comes in. That's the way I handle it. You could plant a cover crop in between there if you'd wanted to. Okay? This is the last slide I want to show you on this stuff here. You see the different, this is the steps you go through in planting a seedling. It's lifted, it's graded, there's storing involved. This is all at the nursery level. And then there's transport. And then there's storing, and there's handling, and there's planting. Do you see all the steps that plant is put under stress? Now, it is your job to try to minimize this stress. Transport. Seedlings coming via UPS or U.S. Postal Service. They get shipped on a Thursday or Friday. They spend the weekend in a hot post office, and you get them on Monday or Tuesday. And you're at work when the seedlings are delivered. They're sitting on the front porch, and the sun's beating down on them. See the stress factors that are going in there that you're putting on those plants? So we got to do our best to try to reduce some of these things. There's a lot of times that we will take a trip. We'll either, depending where the nursery is, we might leave in the middle of the night get to the nursery to pick them stuff, or leave late one day, spend the night over, and bring those plants home and transport them ourselves. We'll often do it in I have a box trailer, and we put all the seedlings in a box trailer. And that time of year, you don't have to worry too much about temperatures unless it's a really warm day, but trying to keep them as cool as possible. And storing them in a cool place, like the basement of a barn or something, an old root cellar is a good place. And then keeping those seedlings moist in the planting process. Don't leave them dry out before they get in the ground. And you'll have much greater success on them.